Well, I think we should maybe start. And I have the best job in the world, really, because I get to talk all day with extraordinary artists and amazing composers, particularly at this festival where there are so many of them. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to introduce you to someone who is really the guest of honor at tomorrow's World Soundtrack Awards concert. And we're going to be hearing a lot of his music played by the orchestra, conducted by Dirk Brosset. Really looking forward to that. Please welcome Max Richter. Thank you so much for doing this, Max. We've got a lot to talk about today. Okay. We've got quite a few clips of your work here. We're obviously going to talk about film and television here, and so we don't necessarily need to talk about too much about background. But what I really want to talk about with you first is the fact that so many people perhaps would have come across your music first in movies with music that wasn't actually written for the film that it appeared in. You've written so many bits of music and albums that seem to have touched a lot of directors and producers that have heard it and wanted to include them in. How does that actually work with you? I mean, do they license it and then you suddenly discover that it's been used, or how does that work? And how do you, when you're conceiving that music, are you often thinking about that in the first instance?
No. When I'm writing something, away from the screen. So one of the solo projects or whatever it is, a ballet or something. I'm only thinking about that. That's the only thing I'm thinking about. I'm only thinking about the way the notes move on the page. That's the only thing I'm thinking about, because that's the only thing I can control. Everything else, whether people like it or not, whether anyone buys it or not, all beyond my control. So I don't think about those things at all. In terms of how people, use the work later on and sort of respond to it or put it in their movies or whatever, that for me is really interesting, because actually when I write a piece, I'm really only half of a conversation. Making something is in a way asking a question or making a kind of a proposition, a sort of what if, And then people respond to it, musicians play it, it's recorded, then people listen to it, and you get back all of this sort of wonderful kind of information about what it is you're actually doing, which is really a wonderful part of that process.
But the using music that wasn't written for a film, but then has an incredible effect on that film, in a way proves so much of what often composers talk about, which is, they write the music for a particular scene and that's the only way it could possibly work. Yeah. So often there are many celebrated cases, aren't there? I mean, 2001 Space Odyssey is a good example here of music that was not written for the screen, but the way in which it's used is so powerful. Yeah. Everyone associates those images with that music from then on. And that's sort of happened with you, didn't it? I mean, there's certain tracks that you have created that have become quite iconic within a completely different context. I think probably everyone carries their own context sort of inside them in some way. If somebody will hear a piece for the first time on a record, then it belongs to that universe, and some people, if somebody encounters it for the first time in a movie, then it's sort of forever part of that movie, isn't it? It's incredibly subjective, the way we glue these things together. Yes.
But certainly it's right that a lot of people experienced, my kind of non-movie work for the first time in a movie, which is a bit paradoxical. But
and not necessarily thinking it's you, because there's been a principal composer for most of the score. Yes. But yours have been dropped in here and there, and they often think maybe that it's music of the composer that's being credited.
I don't know really, maybe, I mean, I think because my work is mostly instrumental, it's in a sense it's sort of less obvious that it's a needle drop, because it just sort of, it's like, oh, the score's a bit different now, but it's,
Well, why don't we talk about Arrival, because this is a good example of exactly what we're talking about here, isn't it? This film by Denis Villeneuve, who is now getting a lot of plaudits for Dune, remake of Dune, an amazing filmmaker. Yeah. But here's a film that had Johan Johansson, who was his main guy, done Sicario famously as well, who did most of the score. Yeah. And then at the end, there's your music.
Yeah.
This track called "On the Nature of Daylight,"
Yeah.
which I think is probably your most
Yeah.
famous one
Yeah.
out of context. We'll see that scene.
Yeah.
But talk me through that process. How did that end up happening?
Well, it started off by me just sort of getting a call from, I guess, the producers saying, "Can we license this piece?" And obviously, Johan was a friend. So the first thing I did is call him up and find out what's going on. You know, what's happening, Johan?
They never imagine that's going to happen. Often, do they?
Yeah,
Producers.
it's just anyway, so I called him up and he said, "Look, you know, it's been in the edit forever. The opening of the film, the end of the film, and I've done 6 versions of this music, and you know, they keep like, you know, make it more like On the Nature of Daylight." So he basically just said, "Look, please, you know, just kind of give them the track and we can all move on, get on with our lives." And so I had a conversation with Denis about the subject matter of the film, because On the Nature of Daylight comes from a record called The Blue Note Books, which is a kind of anti-war protest album written 2003-04, sort of right when the Iraq War was sort of gearing up, you know. So it was important for me to understand why the film, you know, why it would work in that film. And that film is an anti-war film. It's a film of sort of language versus bombs, right?
Yeah.
And also there was another nice aspect of it, which is that, you know, the film has this sort of time structure thing. And On the Nature of Daylight is mostly palindromic anyway. So I sort of thought, oh, okay, so that can sort of, it all fits. Yes. So in a way it was quite an easy decision.
Shall we see it? Let's see this is the very ending of the
right.
of the movie.
Okay.
That has your music.
So, Hannah, this is where your story begins. The day they departed.
You all right?
Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it. And I welcome every moment of it. H-A-N-N-A-H. A-N-N-A-H. Hannah.
You ready, babe? All right. See ya.
Daddy.
You okay?
He's gonna roll over you.
All right, you ready? Oh, guess what? Star stuff.
Ian,
Yeah.
if you could see your whole life from start to finish, would you change things?
Maybe I'd say what I feel more often. I don't know. You know, I've had my head tilted up to the stars for as long as I can remember. You know what surprised me the most? It wasn't meeting them. It was meeting you.
What I love about that is, I mean, that's your scene. That's all you there, and you didn't have to do anything for it.
I know. That's brilliant. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. I mean, it's so rare, isn't it, to be able to be given that sort of moment?
I mean, it's actually it's funny. I mean, obviously, I don't really have any objectivity about that, but what I sort of get from that actually is how beautifully directed and acted it is.
You bet.
It's just a lovely, lovely piece of filmmaking, isn't it?
But also, I mean, he's such a. This is what I think is important about it as well, is that although Johann's music in the film is very different and needs to be really in a way for the rest of the movie, it doesn't feel, as so often it does when this sort of thing happens, it doesn't feel like your music has just been dropped from space. Literally. It works. He makes it work.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, Johann and I sort of broadly coming from a similar musical sort of place anyway. So I guess the distance really between the two wasn't so big.
And by the way, what a tragedy it was to lose Johann. Robbed of so much great music, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
In the future there. It's nice to mention him. Let's move on to something completely different, which is, and now your original music for film as well, but also a lot of music that you've already written. Waltz with Bashir, which I think is probably, I mean, that got a lot of attention as such a startlingly original film and format, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
How did that come about?
Well, this happened with, I mean, in a way by chance. I hadn't written any film music, really. And I was, I love cinema. I've always loved cinema. I spent most of the time I was supposed to be at university in cinemas watching movies, Of
course.
But I never really thought about film composing at all. It wasn't really on my radar. So I got this email from Ari saying he's just written this film in 3 days. Holed up in this shack listening to this record of mine, the Blue Notebooks, on repeat, and now basically that means I now have to score the film. So okay, so I read the script and I thought the script was incredible, really extraordinary, and this idea of animating a documentary, and also the fact that it's very much first person. It's his story, the theme of memory, and sort of recovering this sort of hidden knowledge. And also the socio-political aspect of the storytelling. All of those things really spoke to me, and I thought this is an amazing project, and I'd love to be involved with it.
I'm so interested to hear that you say that you never really thought of yourself as you've been doing film music, because I would imagine a lot of people think that your music that you've written for your albums is cinematic.
Right.
But I wonder whether we only think that now because it's been used so much in cinema.
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I do think for me, music is a way of speaking. It's a storytelling thing. I think we're storytelling creatures, human beings. We love both to tell stories and to listen to them, We narrate our lives to some extent. Our biographies are mostly fiction, aren't they? We just tell ourselves this story about what happened. So I think it's... I think it just does fit together with other storytelling languages quite easily.
Yeah. Well, we'll see a clip from Waltz with Bashir.
Sure.
As I say, it's such an original way of presenting a story, isn't it? This? I mean,
it's unbelievable.
Just explain again. So he was listening to the album, but he used some of that album in the film. He did, yeah. And also there's original music as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see a clip.
פגישה עם בועז התקיימה בחורף 2006. באותו הלילה, בפעם הראשונה אחרי יותר מ-20 שנה, חטפתי פלשבק נוראי ממלחמת לבנון. לא סתם מלבנון, ממערב ביירות. לא סתם מביירות, מהלילה של הטבח במחנות הפליטים סברה ושתילה.
I find that scene very rather unsettling. It's sort of dreamlike, isn't it? Really.
Yes.
How do you write? Do you write with something like that? Are you writing to picture always, or do you often write music first and then find your way to it to the picture itself?
I mean, in the case of Waltz, I had literally no idea how to go about it, having never done it before, and I kind of still don't know how to do it. Glad to say. So I wrote a sketch for that material off the page, off the script, and a kind of scribbly animatic with a kind of. But really, what I was trying to do with that music, which is called The Haunted Ocean, is to try and find a way to embody the ideas of the film and the ideas of the story into the musical organism. So the music does all kinds of things to do with perception and a memory and misremembering. So it's sort of, it feels familiar and strange at the same time, because it's constantly doing things that are wrong. So like the harmony's wrong vertically, it's in the wrong order, and it's in 7, so it feels a bit unstable. It has this kind of chain of suspensions in the melody, which is wrong, which is backwards, in fact. And so it's all sort of, everything's kind of wrong, but it's sort of familiar. So it's just trying to actually sort of encapsulate this kind of weird false memory situation which Ari was dealing with, and just kind of putting that right into the heart of the musical language. You
say you didn't know what you were doing, but presumably you enjoyed it because you then went on to do more movies. So you found your feet.
I had a brilliant time with Ari. I mean, he's such a thoughtful and fun and interesting person and loves music. So it was just like, this is great. Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and it certainly got a lot of attention. What happened after that? Did you start getting offers? People ringing you up?
Not really, no. It took a while. After that, I did kind of nothing for a bit. I went back to making records. I produced an album for an amazing singer, Vashti Bunyan, and other things. And then slowly more film things started to happen in the years afterwards.
Because it's important to say that you're extremely well known as a concert composer. And it's a funny old world, isn't it, in our industry, that people can be very easily pigeonholed and thought of. I mean, this has been a big conversation this year. It's the centenary of Malcolm Arnold.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
A wonderful composer who was often in the concert hall not really regarded as a proper composer because he also did films. And there was a snobbery towards that. Now, I don't think that's as much the case these days, but it's certainly true, isn't it, that some people find it difficult to understand that you can do both.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because I think Malcolm Arnold, I mean, you don't have the same sort of snobbery around, Benjamin Britten or William Walton and, numerous other composers, Khachaturian, who did scoring as well as concert music. But somehow, Malcolm Arnold sort of suffered from that.
Yes.
I mean, I see the two things as really complementing one another. I love the kind of singularity and focus and that kind of private universe of a solo project where I control, every atom of every aspect on that goes out. And I also love the collaborative aspect of film scoring, and which is a fundamentally 100% team thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and which is, of course, has been the undoing of a number of very great composers who didn't want to compromise. Yeah. They wrote the music, and that was the end of, and didn't even understand often the timing issues of it. I mean, there's a few great examples of that in film music history, of course, and so someone else would have to come along and get the music fitted to the film itself.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But actually, a lot of concert composers, they don't have that technical brain. I mean, it's the technical side of things that's the undoing of a lot of composers, that they're just not used to working with technology.
Yeah, it is a very different discipline, I mean, within, concert music and, sort of solo projects, I mean, all you're interested in is the way the notes fit together, and you're just trying to articulate that as cleanly and as kind of effectively and powerfully as you like. But whereas in a film, you might be, yes, you do have to do that, but also, we need 49 seconds where time passes, and then you want to be in somebody else's point of view, which is like a whole different thing. Yeah. That's a completely different thing.
Yes.
So, yeah.
But also anyone who knows your music, and particularly in concert hall and other settings, it's in a way, it's surprising to find you working within such constraints, because so much of your music is expansive and builds over a large amount. I mean, indeed, you've written pieces that last hours and hours and hours, right?
Yeah.
So to find you within a context where you do have to do 49-second cue seems quite surprising in a way.
Yeah. I don't know really. I never thought of that.
I mean, it's the job.
But also
not everyone wants to do that.
Well, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think of this kind of process, which is fundamentally collaborative, and has a strong kind of, if you like, utility dimension. And I actually don't think that's a sort of a dirty word. I'm sort of very happy for music to have a utility dimension. I mean, I think of that as sort of a bit like going to the gym, you know, like it actually really sort of sharpens up your toolkit for doing other things. Yeah. And I sort of quite enjoy that about it.
Fascinating. The other thing that I don't think I ever expected from you, knowing your other music, is title music to TV shows.
Right.
Where you have to do something pretty major and establish the form within 30 seconds or a minute or so.
Yeah.
We have a couple of examples to watch here. Tell me about The Leftovers.
Well, The Leftovers. So the main title for The Leftovers is a kind of... it's just an exercise in sort of how over the top it could possibly be, really. Because the show itself is very, you know, it's somber, it's dark, it's very emotional. And yet this opening sequence, which is a sort of Sistine Chapel, is sort of high. It's in a way sort of quite over the top, quite sort of lurid, you know, it's sort of, and I just thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to try and do something which is sort of really in your face orchestrally straight away. And the way the harmony is and stuff, it's sort of nuts. And
should we explain what the program's about? It's called The Leftovers because there was this major event where a small percentage of people on Earth disappeared.
That's right, yeah. So 2% of people disappear for no particular reason, they just do. And the show is about the sort of impact of that on the people that remain.
Yeah. Let's see the opening sequence. Composers often talk about how it takes longer to write a short piece than it does a long piece. Is that true?
I don't know. I mean, that was quite quick in a way because it was so sort of, it's a very sort of nuts, kind of playful bit of music in a way. And I wasn't really expecting them to go for it, to be honest. So and then they did.
Fair enough. The other opening sequence we have from TV series is My Brilliant Friend. That's another sort of coming of age series, isn't it? But very different.
Yeah, I love this show. Absolutely love it. It's so beautifully made and it's
Italian.
Yes, exactly. So it's this Elena Ferrante series of novels. Basically, the story of a relationship, a friendship over a lifetime of these two young girls, and it's just amazing work. So yeah, great to be part of that.
Okay, let's see the opening sequence to My Brilliant Friend. It's such a different way of working, though, isn't it? Where if you're writing a concert piece and you have all this time to establish a sound and a form and everything, but you've got to do it all so quickly. Then you've got to summarize an entire series in one burst like that.
Yes, I mean that music is it's the way it is because of the way the story is and the characters are. So it's the story. The story is these two girls, and they have, in a way, quite different trajectories through life, and there's a lot of trouble in their lives, psychological challenges, torment, difficulties. So a lot of the music for the show, including that main title, is based on this La Folia theme. But it's kind of subverted. So La Folia is, so it's a sort of 16th, 17th century Mediterranean dance, often associated with kind of madness and extremes of passion. And this show is very much about extremes of passion. That's one of the sort of trips through the La Folia kind of landscape in the show.
You like subverting old composers, don't you?
Well, I think the thing about that is because, we all kind of know what that music should sound like. Yeah. And because I've sort of disrupted it and, messed with the way the harmony works, your brain sort of tries to correct it all the time. And it means that you actually sort of pay attention. And that process of sort of, it makes you very active in the listening.
I wanted to ask you about the musicians you work with, because you started as a performing musician, really, didn't you? You were in this wonderful group that's still going with different people now, Piano Circus, which is was a collective, really, of lots of pianists together playing and discovering new and commissioning new music and everything, which I think says a lot. It wasn't just an ensemble that got together and played gigs; it was a little bit more than that. Yeah. So presumably the performers that you work with, it's incredibly important, the people who are performing your music.
Yes.
Your cast. Nonita talked about casting musicians. You're doing the same, I guess.
Yes, I mean you get to know people over time, and everyone is they're a human being. They have properties, they have qualities, they have strengths and a particular aspects to their way of being and making music, and you sort of, oh yes, that person would be great on this, and you just start to put together your gang of collaborators.
And who are they? Who are your favourite collaborators in that?
Well, it's a mix. I mean, I have an ensemble who when I play my own music, so that's people, and they would be mostly doing like anything soloistic in any of the movies, and they're sort of London based, a bunch of guys, and they're wonderful.
Because I think that's so often the best bit, I think, for composers who sit on their own writing for so long. Yeah, it's when you get with the guys again, and something that, of course, has been was missing for so much of last year, of course, because of the pandemic and everyone working remotely. Yeah. But I'm imagining you, especially thinking about with something like Piano Circus, where you're often in a circle and pianos. It is a collective experience.
Yeah, properly. Yeah. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about music is it's fundamentally a social activity. It's something that connects us. It's as players, as performers, there's a community, a performing community, which is sort of making that thing come to life, and also the sort of bigger community. That sort of interchange between the performance and the audience. I mean, that's such a big part of what music is. And over the last 18 months or whatever it was, it's I think we all really felt the lack of that dramatically,
and yet overcame it so often. Many. I mean, Daniel talked about it yesterday, Pemberton, and Nonita talked about it today, about how you get over those issues and you can still produce something. Yeah,
you just have to be like super creative in terms of how you achieve things.
But that can sometimes be a good thing, can't it? It concentrates your creative energies a little bit when you're restricted
completely.
More.
Yeah, I mean, limitations are, really, really useful in a sense, because, if you don't have boundaries of any sort, then, you can't, it's hard to focus.
But it's the great film composer thing, isn't it? Give them 3 weeks to write a cue, they'll take 3 weeks. But if you want it tomorrow, they'll have it for you tomorrow.
Exactly. That's right.
Doesn't matter how restrictive it is.
Exactly.
Let's talk about that breed of person that is very rarely musical, the director.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want from your directors? What do you like most to hear from them when given your steer for the movies?
Well, I think the thing is, it's not easy to talk about music even between musicians. You know, I mean, it's a slippery thing, isn't it? And what affects one person in one way affects another person in a different way, and you know, you hardly know if you're even speaking the same language sometimes. But with directors, you obviously can't expect them to have any real way to convey what it is they're after. In musical terms. So really what I'm just trying to do is to get an understanding of what the story really is, of what the project really is at its fundamentals. And then sort of rely on the fact that they've hired me because they like something I do. And then just try to sort of bring my voice into that world. So
you don't want too much from them, really. So you'll spot the film.
Yes,
but you don't want too much of what you might.
I'm just not sure how useful that is a lot of the time. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of it can be quite misleading, actually. You know, someone will say X, Y, and Z, and you just think, well, but that's sort of what I did, and then it wasn't. You know, it doesn't. So I think I mean, it's puzzle solving, really. And actually, this is why I like doing movies, is for that puzzle solving process. Is to try and sort of, you're making a voyage into this world, and music will be part of it. And trying to collectively understand how music can best be part of it, and what it can really do that the other elements aren't doing. You know, that for me that's the riddle, to try and figure that out. And that's sort of the process, I think.
And so much of the conversation yesterday and today has been about how these days, because technology allows directors to go right to the wire. Yeah. Editing. And because it's digital, you can almost finish the film on a Friday and it'll be premiered on the Sunday. Yeah. That can put a huge amount of pressure on composers who are now often writing 10 versions of the same cue just in case, or they're having to then produce another one and they have to get someone else to do it because they don't have time. All of that's happening now. How do you deal with that? Have you ever had to deal with that kind of pressure?
Well, I mean, there are certainly, you know, sometimes things go very fast. I mean, I remember in The Leftovers, we did 3 episodes in 2 weeks from scratch, which is pretty fast. And there have been feature projects I've done in 2 weeks, you know. But that's not the ideal.
Well, no, indeed not.
That's not the ideal.
We'll all agree on that.
So, I mean, I think it's... I mean, I think, you know, when people are endlessly fiddling with something, it's more about trying to understand why they're doing that.
Yes.
Rather than try and keep up with it all the time. Because actually, quite often people just need to kind of work through, you know, they need to go up 25 blind alleys in order to forget about them. And there's not necessarily any point also going there, you know. Right. So it's actually sort of wait for it to kind of subside a wee bit and then actually make a meaningful steps forward.
Have there been cues though that you've struggled to find a way to get it right, and you've had to do it quite a lot of times in order to find the right fit? Yeah, and
I mean, I think that's normal. You know, I think it's part of discovering what that world really is sort of writing into it in detail and spending a lot of time just kind of investigating it from a musical standpoint. And I think that's really a natural part of the process.
I want to talk about Miss Sloane, because that's a very different film to any of the we've talked about so far. Mm-hmm. And this is Jessica Chastain as a kind of real bloodthirsty lobbyist.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Trying to pass some gun legislation, and then her sort of private life unravels around it, and they're up against the ethics committee.
Yeah.
No, it's a very talky film, isn't it? I mean, she
Really is.
and actually it reminded me really of an Aaron Sorkin type
Yeah.
of film. It's that
Very
sort of
much so.
smart dialogue, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she's absolutely banging it out
Yeah.
all the way through the film. Doesn't give you that much room for maneuver.
True. Yeah. I mean, I love this film because, basically because of her character and what the film is saying. You know, I just thought that was a really valuable story to tell. And yeah, it was an interesting one for me. I hadn't done anything like that before, and I really like doing projects which are sort of new. You know, I like to try and move beyond what I know, and just sort of discover new things.
But it's about the most normal film you've done in a sort of Hollywoody kind of talky movie, isn't it?
Maybe, yeah.
But very different. We have the ending, which is, maybe you could talk me through this, because this is the reveal essentially. This is she's saved up a lot of information, which is essentially now the truth.
Yeah.
And she's gonna, as we've discovered throughout the film, she's going to beat them. She's going to beat this ethics committee if it's the last thing she does, and it is indeed the last thing she does in the film. So your music's actually is growing here. It's you're building up here. It's coming up at a pace.
Yeah.
As I say, it's a lot of words, but you're under that, pushing the pace of it. Really,
yeah, it just keeps it. I'm trying to remember this now, but it's very simple music, which sort of plants this seed that there's something going on underneath things. So it's all quite sort of subsonic, and it also is built around a sort of a ground bass, a cycling harmonic field that sort of conveys this idea of a machine sort of turning wheels, because that's kind of what she's doing, and she's also, in a way, you know, she's fighting a machine as well. So it's all sort of mechanisms.
And if you haven't seen Miss Sloane and you want to see it, I suggest you close your eyes and put your fingers in your ears for this, because this is the ending that gives everything away.
Major spoiler.
So we can apologise for that. But it's a really great use of music. So let's see the ending of Miss Sloane.
These rats are the real parasites on American democracy. I anticipated if we had sufficient success in lobbying for the Heaton-Harris bill, there may be an assault against me personally, to stall our momentum and to damage our credibility. Lobbying is about foresight, about anticipating your opponent's moves and devising countermeasures.
I'd like to discuss my future.
This is hardly the time, Cookie.
The winner plots one step ahead of the opposition and plays a trump card just after they play theirs.
Actually, it is the time.
It's about making sure you surprise them.
The fuck is this?
And that they don't surprise you.
My resignation. Academia is more my scene.
When I left Cole Kravitz and Waterman, I retained an operative of mine in their ranks. All right, Jane, contact Adolfo Schmidt and tell him there is a total of 6 coming over.
Says I'm coming.
A plan was hatched to bankroll a trumped-up hearing at the behest of the gun lobby.
There's gotta be something.
I'm surprised you picked up.
Sorry, you have the wrong number. She's in breach of Senate ethics rules. We can prove it.
I placed George DuPont under surveillance until he met with a member of Congress who exhibited sufficient moral bankruptcy to collude with such a plan. That member was Senator Ronald Michael Sperling.
Order! This is not a platform you can use to make malicious defendants.
Input the following address into your browser 193.184.216.449. Download a file named Earthquake.
Hearing is adjourned.
Stop. Know the root of the word annihilate. It means reduce to nothing.
Back up, please. Back up. Back up.
That's what they're going to do to you, Rob.
And there's the cello again for the intimate bit, the personal bit between those two, isn't there? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one that comes up a lot, I think, as an instrument. Piano as well seems to be the one that people often go to for the more personal sections.
Yes, I think I think of the composers often are pianists as well, aren't they? So we sort of tend to gravitate there for the kind of that sort of direct line. Yeah. Mm.
How do you work? Describe to me your studio and the process of actually producing the sounds you do.
Sure. Well, I let's see. So we've just actually moved. So I've built a new studio, but Miss Sloane was actually written in a tiny spare bedroom, about 7 feet square, on one computer, and that's it. Just because that's where we were living at the time. We've just spent the last couple of years building a new place, which is has a writing room and an orchestral recording room and a Atmos mix room. So I've gone from kind of tiny to big. So that's fun. My writing room is it's mostly full of old synthesizers and old bits and pieces, which are things I love to work with. I'm very analog. We have a tape machine, 2-inch machine, various other things like that. In terms of the actual writing process, I write on a piece of paper, probably at the piano mostly, or not, at a desk, you know. And I'm trying to. I sort of start there because I want the music to kind of have a kind of internal logic, something I can sort of stand by, and something which will also serve me later on when I'm trying to shape that material, so that it has something substantial there that I can kind of work with. So sort of making material, and then for movies, then it goes into the computer. And that'll be with Logic, and then Sibelius for the scoring part. And all the electronic things come from the synths and various other toys.
I've always been fascinated in the number of state-of-the-art home studios that I've been in of film composers, and in the corner is a piano with some manuscript paper on it, with pencil markings on it. It can often just come back down to that as being the most spontaneous way of getting something down.
It is the quickest way by miles. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if that's your background. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose only now really are people more likely to put it down first into a computer because of the technology available. But isn't there a different way the brain works when it comes to the end of your fingers and a pencil, or am I just sounding like an old-fashioned?
No, it is different. I mean, working on a piece of paper or working in your head is a different process from working with a machine. Because when you're working with a machine, you're half composing and half sitting in the audience. Because really what you do is you try something and you press play and you go, and then you change it. So it's like you're in the audience. You're not. It's a different thing. It's a different process.
So you're more likely to play to the audience.
Well, I don't know really. I just think it feels different. For me, having a piece of a pencil and a paper and just sort of actually working on the page, I just feel like it's a richer experience somehow. And it's also just how I started, so I'm just used to it.
Yeah. I mean, we discussed this a little yesterday with Daniel Pemberton. It's easy to make something sound great and cool, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good music.
Yeah. Well, good music. I mean, that's an interesting that's a bit of a puzzle in itself, isn't it? Because it's so much contextual. It's so, what works with an image, extraordinarily well. If you take the image away, maybe you're like, I'm not sure there's anything there really. But when you put it with the image, it's incredible. So, yeah.
Who are your influences? Who do you, particularly in this area of film and everything? Are there people that you admire, you listen to?
Well, like I said, I mean, I never really sort of set out to be a film composer, but I guess the people I sort of was drawn to are probably the same ones everyone was drawn to be honest. Like Bernard Herrmann and Morricone and these kinds of guys. And then I guess some of the more electronic stuff, Clockwork Orange, all of that, some of the more sort of out there things.
Vangelis?
But, well, I think you can't sort of ignore Vangelis. Yeah. I mean, that's an amazing...
You certainly can't now. He's enormous.
Both, yes. But I mean, both Blade Runner and Chariots of Fire are very original, very original works, aren't they? And they're very influential, actually.
Well, and of course, what's fascinating about them is I mean, particularly with Chariots of Fire, you've got a period film, but with a very, very modern at that point score, and it shouldn't work.
I'd love to
somehow it does.
Yeah, I'd love to know how that decision got made, actually, because the thing is, he uses the synths in a very orchestral way, right? They're not really well, there is that sort of pulsating thing, but they're not really used as electronic instruments. They're used more like you would use an orchestra.
Yeah, I mean, it's his palette.
It is.
That's how he uses it.
Let's
talk about the last film we're going to talk about. We don't have a clip of it, but we do have the music for it, or a little bit of it, and that's Ad Astra, which was this hugely expansive, philosophical, psychological drama set in space with Brad Pitt as this astronaut going in search of his father.
Yeah.
It's very slow moving. There's a huge amount of space in it, in all the different versions of that word. In a way, it fits you perfectly, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. That's why I wanted to do it.
Is that how it works?
Well, pretty much. I mean, I just sort of, they called up and asked me about it, and I just thought, well, I mean, I knew James's work. He's an amazing filmmaker and very, very intelligent about music as well. And, like all kids, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was little, and I just thought, well, this is my chance, This is so it was, it's a wonderful project to be involved with.
But it's not always the case that composers get space to write their music in. I mean, I keep using this word space. It sounds cheesy because it's a space movie, but you know what I mean? It's so often, I mean, with something like Miss Sloane, you get those big moments at the end.
Yeah.
But most of the time you're working in and out of
dialogue. Yeah.
Whereas here you were given all this, all these places to put the music.
Right. I mean, Ad Astra is a film with very little dialogue, really. It's got amazing images. It's got a few little, lines of sort of their sort of talismanic little statements, puzzles in a way. And then you have this amazing visual space, which is also an amazing musical space.
Yeah.
And it was, just a wonderful thing to be able to explore that.
Well, and you were able to push it a little bit, weren't you? Musically.
Yeah. I mean, there's three kinds of music in Ad Astra, really. There's the sort of personal, interior, emotional world of Brad's character, and that's sort of broadly instrumental and sort of piano-based. And then you have the sort of the cosmic music, which is, about like the big questions and the big stories and all of that. And it's partly orchestral, but there's another strand in that, and that's to do with what the story really is about, which is, Brad's character goes from Earth to Neptune. When I started thinking about that, I realized we made that journey. So the Voyager probes made that journey. They're still going, in fact, aren't they? So they left in the 77 and are still going. So what's interesting from my point of view is that they recorded magnetic data every 9 seconds all the way and transmitted it back to Earth, which was all at the University of Iowa. So I thought, okay, I'm going to call up the University of Iowa and get the data, which we did. So I had all this data from the journey that the Voyager probes had made. So we used that data to make computer-modeled instruments. And that meant that when Brad's flying past Saturn, I can make music out of magnetic measurements from the site. So it's almost like a kind of site recording. Not really, but it was just a really nice way to sort of embody the journey in a musical way. And I guess
you're the third composer in a row in these talks that's talked about putting something in to the music that most people listening wouldn't be aware of.
Yeah,
and yet it's just an important sort of subliminal
it sort
thing.
It sort of helps you sort of get inside the world.
Yeah.
And the third music in Ad Astra, and is really because it's very much a boy's own story. It's like the son, the father, and this kind of male sort of weird kind of bromance they have, where it's like he's trying to reach him, they miss one, but it's all about men. And I was just like, well, why is there? There must have been a mother and a wife here somewhere. Who was a participant in this kind of drama. So basically I made a whole lot of material which is female chorus, so women's chorus, which became a kind of like the voice of the universe, sort of amniotic fluid for this story to happen in. So kind of something bigger than this psychodrama.
The track we're going to hear is Terra Incognita. Perhaps
okay.
you could introduce that for us.
I'd love to. I can't remember.
Why don't we let the music?
Why don't we let the music
speak for itself? I chose that track for a number of reasons, but
Right.
I mean, one thing that I think is always extraordinary about music like that is that people hear that music in the cinema,
Yeah.
don't think anything of it,
Right.
but they would never. Most people would never go to a concert hall.
I know.
And sit
You'd
and listen
empty
to
the
that
concert
music.
hall with that. Yeah.
It's your opportunity, in a way, as a composer, to reach a huge audience
Yeah.
with music that they would never otherwise go and hear.
Well, that's it's interesting you chose that one, because that is actually one of the sort of experiments I made early on for James, because obviously there's a sort of a big, if you like, shadow hanging over Ad Astra, which is 2001.
Right.
So there's lots of sort of jokey references and stuff, and all the tech in the film is kind of quite 70s,
Yes.
So it has this sort of texture. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to make the experimental music that people used to make in like the 60s, and use that, sort of repurpose that language and use it in this film. So that's one of those sketches.
Well, and that's the other reason why I chose it, because there is in cinema, I think, almost now, because of Kubrick, almost an expectation of what space sounds like.
Yeah, it sounds like Ligeti.
Ligeti. Yeah. It sounds like Ligeti, and that's the obvious influence in there. But isn't that interesting? I mean, because again, that's music that wasn't written for the cinema,
Absolutely
that
not.
Kubrick brought in,
Yeah.
and we now totally associate
That's right.
with the sound of space, because he used it so brilliantly.
Yeah, he did. I mean, his use of music is extraordinary.
And I think, wasn't it true that Ligeti wasn't quite sure about the use of his music in Kubrick's films until he saw the checks coming in?
That's right, yeah.
Which is often the way in which people are persuaded on many things.
Changed his mind, yeah.
But again, he a concert composer who was writing serious music for the concert hall, but suddenly finds himself in a completely different context, and boom, his music is being listened to by many millions of people all around the world who'd never heard of him before.
Right, exactly, yeah.
I mean, that sort of brings us full circle, doesn't it, with what we were talking about before, when your music started to appear in
I guess so, yeah. No, I mean, it is a window into the work where, which wouldn't happen otherwise. So I think it's great, yeah.
Because I think you're one of those composers who just sees it as music. It doesn't matter what the genre is, the context, where it. I mean, you're interested in your music being in all sorts of different situations, aren't you?
Yes, I feel that really strongly, actually. I mean, certainly within classical music, there is a kind of a school of thought that you kind of almost have to earn an appreciation of classical music, and you have to be sort of it's got all sorts of weird sort of moral and social associations around it, which is has the effect of basically keeping people out of it. And I just really, I find that a horrible sort of mindset. And for me, I'm really interested in a piece of music having many doors into it, and I really don't mind which one people walk through. We had this thing recently with Bridgerton, where there's a piece of mine in Bridgerton from Recomposed. Oh, yeah. And, gazillion people are now like that piece. And but from that, they will go to other things, and they'll go to, Vivaldi, and then they'll go to other things. And that's great.
Will they? I mean, I've often wondered whether they do, or whether they just want to hear more Recomposed.
More Bridgerton. I don't know. But I mean, that's my sort of hope, really, that it's a sort of a gateway into something bigger, which is great.
I mean, it's something you always hope for, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that maybe it happened with Ligeti, maybe it didn't. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's quite a difficult one. I can't imagine. I mean, it was like when Pavarotti was successful with Nessun Dorma in the 1990 World Cup. Everyone said, "Oh, this means lots of football fans will go to the opera," but of course they didn't.
No,
they just wanted to go hear more Pavarotti.
That's right. Yeah.
But music is a funny thing. It
is weird.
I think one of the not lessons, but one of the things we can perhaps learn from all of this is that so often with music that you write now, you never quite know where it might appear. Right. You have to just keep writing, keep recording, make sure that it's being pushed by the right people, and you never know when it's going to pop up.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, that's going back to this idea that, the only thing I really can control are the notes on the page. That's it. So that's my business, if you like, the notes on the page. That's it.
Yes. Well, look, I'm certain that people have questions for you, Max, if that's okay.
Sure.
So please put your hands up if you have a question. Straight in here at the front. There goes the mic.
I like that
Cool,
microphone.
right,
It's
isn't it?
really
Everybody
cool.
loves this
I
microphone.
love that.
It's
yeah.
amazing.
I have something to say about the film using the Ligeti being space sounding like Ligeti.
Yes.
The problem I have with that is that that's all it's going to be in a lot of ears.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I deal with a lot of people who want relaxing piano classical pieces, and the issue I have with that is if you think of music that way, that's all it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
What are your comments?
You
on
mean
that?
that the utility dimension of music, so music for relaxing, music for being scary, has a particular character? It's sort of cliche. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So you want to know how do you break out of it, presumably?
I think it's not really possible to make a rule about that. I think everything is contextual. I personally, I'm interested in the utility aspect of music. Historically, over centuries, we've had music for dancing, music for being buried, music for getting married, music for making war, all of these different things. It's always been part of music's role to perform social and personal functions. So I don't think this is new. It may be that, as sort of marketing power has sort of got behind these things, that you get a kind of a stratification. But I don't think it's a kind of a new question.
But presumably what happens is that, and this may be what you're referring to, is that because everybody gets locked onto the idea that space needs to sound like Ligeti, no one gets out of it.
Yes.
So who's got the new sound of space?
Well, it's funny because actually that music is not in the film. It's a sketch I made for James, and actually the main theme of Ad Astra is a thing called To the Stars, which is
what Ad Astra means.
Which is a very tonal kind of string chorale.
Yes.
I don't know. I think there probably isn't a single answer to that question.
Anyone else? Can we go up to the next section right at the front, please? We're going right up to the up there, please. Thank you.
They wanted to go up. He wants to go up there first.
Andy's far too important to ask a question here. We'll save it up for the end. Big moment.
Right, thanks. Hi. I've got a question, Max, about temp tracks, because obviously a lot of people are in love with your In the Nature of Daylight track, and it's been used obviously in films, but obviously with, this track can be found many times as a temp track where composers go work on a film and they see On the Nature of Daylight end up in the temp. They have to mimic it, and I'm wondering how do you cope with writing when you are confronted with temp tracks? How do you cope, or do you have to cope with that issue? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a temp track is something which is really, I feel like it's for the editors, really. I mean, people sort of need something to cut to a lot of the time. It just sort of helps them get a feeling for the architecture and the way that energy and time is structured through the film. So I totally understand the need for it. And I mean, to some extent, it can tell you something about what the creative team, what the director is trying to achieve. But I wouldn't really spend any time with a temp track, personally. And I just don't find that helpful, because it's somebody else's work for some other time, some other place. It doesn't really it sort of doesn't mean anything. I think it obviously has an important function in terms of the way the edit comes together, and I totally get that, but I don't think it's that helpful for a composer to sort of spend time with that. Just speaking personally, yeah.
Have you ever heard someone score or a cue and thought, hello, that was definitely temped with my music?
It does happen quite a bit, yeah.
I'm sure it does. Anybody else up there while we're up there? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hope you can hear me.
Sure.
It's my first time speaking into an orange cube.
Yeah.
Okay.
My question's about style. I guess your style can maybe be described as like distinct or maybe recognizable somehow. And I'm wondering, like, specifically with filmmakers, if you run into the situation that they are maybe expecting a certain sound from you, like they'll commission you to write something and you might be inadvertently asked to like rewrite a piece that you've already created. Does that ever happen with you?
Yeah, it does. It does happen. I mean, I think part of a scoring process is trying to discover material which feels like it comes from that world, which it lives in that world. And that's kind of an experimental process. So, I'm sort of interested in the things I haven't done yet. That to me is like, that's where the interesting stuff is. So the things I've already done, well, I've sort of done those. So I'm sort of more interested in the questions and the journey. And that is a collaborative journey. In the case of film, it's a completely collaborative art form. And a film score is not a symphony. It's a film score. It's part of something bigger. So, yeah, I'm sort of very much interested in that conversational, puzzle-solving aspect of that process.
Next question. Let's come down here. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much.
Hello.
I have a question about your score on Ad Astra. Basically along the same lines about musical identity. I believe there were 3 of you working on the music, you being the main composer. You also had Nils Fram and I can't remember the third name. Lornbell. How does that kind of work? I mean, you have a very strong identity, so does someone such as Nils Fram. How does someone like that work for you? What's the process? How do you communicate?
Well, to be honest, there wasn't a process really. I worked with James on the film, and the post-production process on that film became increasingly, how could you describe it? A little bit chaotic and a little bit sort of high maintenance. And as part of that process, some other people were brought on to write additional music for it. Niels, I think, he did write a bunch of music, but the only thing that ended up in the film is his track Saves, which is off one of his records. And Lornbert wrote a bunch of music as well. But I didn't sort of even know about that really, to be honest. There was a parallel process, shall we say, going on in the background. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things,
And was there a musical director supervising all that, or not?
I have no idea.
That's right, okay. part of the
I don't think anyone knew what was happening towards the end.
Okay.
Gosh, it so often happens. While we're here, Andy, do you want to ask your question?
I want to ask you about sleep, but before that, musicologists will often say of Igor Stravinsky that although he got pegged as a modernist, his greatest influence was Bach.
Right.
In your case, there doesn't seem to be any question that the sort of shimmer of the high Baroque is felt and heard in a lot of your music. And I'm just wondering if you think there was something about that period that we're in danger of losing, that's so too precious to lose, and that you're sort of helping us to hold on to it.
Yeah, well, I love Bach. You know, my first musical memory is of the Bach double concerto when I was probably about 3 years old. My training is in, you know, harmony and counterpoint, sort of old school Bach chorales, blah, 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 Palestrina, all of that, you know. So I love that material, and that is my toolkit, pretty much, as far as moving notes one against the other goes. So I deeply appreciate the way that music is put together. And I think there's something about sort of well-organized, well-made harmonic and contrapuntal structures, which gives them a kind of durability. And when you have a durable musical object, you can form it and transform it, and it remains recognizable. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, we often want to be doing in a piece, in a film score, is transform material. But in order to transform something and it still be recognizable, it has to be substantial in the first place as a musical object. So I think that's the thing that, you know, if you like, old school harmony and counterpoint gives you.
Is it the mathematical elegance that makes it so substantial?
Yeah, what is it? I don't know. It's the fact that the notes are in the right places. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Adi. I want to get one more question because we are running out of time. Forgive me. We have one more up here, and then we have to go because there's a screening following at 5. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for your music.
It's great to be here.
My question is, when you want to start a composition, not for a movie, but just for yourself and orchestra, where do you get inspiration? And linked to that, if you have a writer's block, what do you do?
Well, I've sort of got the opposite of a writer's block, to be honest, and that's pretty much constant. So I've been fortunate never to be in that position. But in terms of starting points, the starting points for the solo projects are really the stories I want to tell. So a piece like, you know, the Blue Notebooks is a kind of a protest album against the Iraq War. Most recent project, Voices, is kind of a way to present the text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Sleep is again a protest album against the sort of neoliberal 24/7 switched on mechanized culture. So yeah, they're just things I want to talk about, and that actually also informs my choice of movies. You know, so I'm drawn to movies which tell the stories which I think are sort of that need telling in the world now. So yeah, that's all part of it.
Well, for instance, for your orchestral music, where do you get inspiration? Because it's another kind of music.
Because it's a different kind of music?
Yes.
Is it? I don't know. Are you thinking about Wolfworks or something like that? Or,
for instance?
Yeah. Yeah, the orchestral music is... I mean, it all comes from the same place. It's still just notes on the page, and what I'm trying to do with the notes on the page is I'm trying to convey the questions I want to ask, the stories I want to tell, as precisely as possible, with a kind of maximum economy. And, you know, I'm trying to sort of get the maximum from the minimum all the time. So the composing process is mostly about taking away, in my case.
Okay, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your questions, Max. Thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
We just before you leave, we are of course really looking forward to hearing your music live. That's what music's all about. To hear it live tomorrow in the World Soundtrack Awards. Max can't stick around for chatting today, but I hope you will join us tomorrow if you can for the Q&A in the afternoon, and then of course we have the World Soundtrack Awards in the evening. But please join me once again in saying thank you very much to Max Richter.
Thanks guys. Thank you.